Emma Carter had always believed that her life in Portland followed a quiet and predictable rhythm, the kind of life many people dreamed about but rarely noticed while living it. Yet one calm autumn evening, everything began to shift in a way she never expected. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, tapping gently against the windows of the small house she shared with her husband Daniel, and Emma stood near the kitchen sink watching the wet street glow under the soft yellow light of the street lamps while thinking about how peaceful the neighborhood looked at night. Daniel usually returned home late because of his work as an architect, but that evening the sound of his car pulling into the driveway came much earlier than usual, which immediately caught Emma's attention. She dried her hands on a towel and walked toward the door just as Daniel stepped inside, removing his coat slowly and greeting her with a tired but thoughtful smile that seemed different from his normal, relaxed expression. Emma noticed the change right away because she had known Daniel for many years and could read the smallest shifts in his mood. During dinner, he spoke less than usual, answering her questions politely but clearly lost in his thoughts, and although the conversation remained calm, Emma sensed that something important was on his mind. After they finished eating, Daniel placed his plate in the sink and asked if they could sit together in the living room for a moment because he wanted to talk about something unusual that had happened earlier that day. The word unusual made Emma curious, so she followed him to the couch where the soft lamplight created a warm glow across the quiet room while the rain continued outside. Daniel took a slow breath as if organizing his thoughts before speaking, and Emma waited patiently because she knew he preferred to explain things carefully rather than rush into them. Earlier that afternoon, Daniel began. He had met an old colleague named Michael Hayes for coffee downtown, someone he had worked with on several architectural projects over the years. Michael had always been someone Daniel respected because he was thoughtful, intelligent, and calm under pressure. But in recent months, his life had changed dramatically after a difficult divorce ended a long marriage. Daniel explained that Michael had seemed different lately, quieter and more reflective, as if he were trying to rebuild parts of his life that had suddenly disappeared. During their meeting, the conversation started with normal work topics and casual updates, but gradually Michael began speaking more honestly about how lonely life had felt since the divorce, describing how empty his house seemed at night and how strange it was to adjust to a completely different routine after years of shared habits. Daniel listened carefully because he understood how painful major life changes could be, yet he did not expect what Michael would say next. Michael admitted that during the years he had known Daniel, he had always admired the strong and steady relationship Daniel shared with Emma, noticing how they supported each other and treated one another with kindness and respect. According to Michael, that kind of trust was rare and valuable, something many people searched for but struggled to maintain. Emma listened quietly while Daniel repeated the conversation, feeling both surprised and curious about where the story might lead. Daniel explained that after talking for a long time, Michael had carefully suggested something he described as unusual, not inappropriate or secretive, but simply different from the traditional ways people usually thought about relationships. Michael wondered whether there might be a way for their lives to become more connected in the future through deeper friendship and shared time together, something based on honesty and mutual understanding rather than loneliness or isolation. Daniel admitted that the suggestion had surprised him because he had never imagined discussing such ideas before, yet Michael made it clear that there was absolutely no pressure or expectation, only a thought that he wanted Daniel and Emma to consider openly if they ever felt comfortable exploring new possibilities in their social and emotional lives. When Daniel finished explaining the conversation, he looked at Emma carefully because he wanted her to understand that he had not made any decisions or promises during the meeting, choosing instead to bring the idea home so they could discuss it together with honesty. Emma sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the story, while the rain outside softened into a gentle drizzle, and she realized that the peaceful routine of her evening had unexpectedly turned into something far more complicated than she had imagined when Daniel walked through the door. She knew that Daniel valued transparency in their marriage, which was why he had chosen to tell her immediately rather than keep the conversation private. After thinking for a moment, Emma asked Daniel what he personally felt about the idea, whether he had dismissed it right away, or whether it had made him question things about life and relationships that people rarely discuss openly. Daniel leaned back against the couch and admitted that he was still uncertain because the suggestion was so unexpected that he needed time to understand his own reaction before forming a clear opinion. He explained that sometimes life presents moments that challenge the way people think about connection, trust, and emotional support. And although those moments can feel uncomfortable at first, they also create opportunities to reflect on what truly matters in relationships. Emma looked around their quiet living room, thinking about the years she and Daniel had spent building a stable life together, and she realized that whatever this unusual situation might eventually mean, the most important part was the honesty with which they were discussing it now. Neither of them knew exactly what the future might hold or whether Michael's idea would remain only a conversation. Yet the evening had already changed something between them because it opened a door to deeper communication about feelings, expectations, and the ways relationships evolve over time. As the rain finally stopped outside and the night grew still, Emma understood that the calm life she had always known might soon face questions she had never expected to consider, and although she felt uncertain, she also sensed that this unexpected conversation marked the beginning of a chapter that could reshape how she and Daniel understood love, trust, and the quiet strength of their marriage. Emma slept very little that night because Daniel's words kept returning to her mind again and again, and as the quiet house rested in the darkness, she stared at the ceiling thinking about how a single conversation could suddenly introduce questions she had never imagined before. By morning, the rain had stopped, and soft sunlight entered the kitchen as Emma prepared coffee, but her thoughts still moved between curiosity and uncertainty. Daniel walked in a few minutes later, looking just as thoughtful as he had the night before, and although neither of them spoke immediately, there was an understanding between them that the discussion was not finished. Emma finally asked Daniel to explain more clearly what Michael had actually meant, because the idea sounded unusual but still vague. Daniel nodded and told her that Michael was not suggesting anything secretive or disrespectful, but rather he believed that people sometimes created strong emotional connections that extended beyond traditional boundaries of friendship, connections based on trust, support, and honest communication. Michael had explained that after his divorce, he realized how much he valued meaningful companionship, not simply romantic love, but the feeling of belonging somewhere again. He admired how Emma and Daniel worked as partners in life, and said that sometimes relationships could grow stronger when people allowed themselves to build deeper friendships with others who shared similar values. Emma listened carefully while stirring her coffee, trying to understand the heart of the idea rather than the confusion surrounding it. Daniel continued explaining that Michael had emphasized one important point. Everything would have to remain respectful, transparent, and completely comfortable for everyone involved. Otherwise, it would not work at all. There would be no secrets, no pressure, and no expectations beyond honest conversation. Emma appreciated that Daniel had been open about the discussion instead of hiding it, because honesty had always been the foundation of their marriage. Later that afternoon, Daniel went to work while Emma stayed home thinking about the situation in a calm and logical way. She walked through the park near their neighborhood, watching families play with their children and couples walking their dogs, and she realized that most people believed relationships had only one acceptable shape, yet human emotions were often more complicated than simple definitions. Emma did not feel angry or threatened by the idea because Daniel had not done anything wrong, but she felt curious about why Michael trusted them enough to share such a personal thought. That evening, Daniel returned home and suggested that perhaps the best way to understand Michael's intentions was to talk with him directly instead of imagining possibilities. Emma agreed because she believed open conversation could prevent misunderstandings before they grew larger. 2 days later, the three of them met at a quiet cafe near the river, where Michael greeted them warmly but respectfully, clearly aware that the conversation might feel uncomfortable. He thanked Emma for agreeing to meet and immediately reassured her that he had no intention of causing problems in their marriage. Instead, he wanted to explain his thoughts honestly so they could decide together whether the idea made sense or should simply remain a conversation. Michael spoke calmly, describing how his divorce had forced him to rethink many things about relationships, especially the importance of emotional support and meaningful friendships. He explained that he had always admired how Emma and Daniel communicated openly and respected each other's independence, and he believed that strong friendships between adults could sometimes create a supportive community instead of loneliness. Emma noticed that Michael's words carried sincerity rather than manipulation, and she began to understand that he was not trying to interfere in their marriage, but rather searching for connection in a respectful way. Daniel asked several careful questions, making sure that boundaries and expectations would always remain clear. Michael agreed completely, saying that if the idea created even a small amount of discomfort, they should forget about it immediately. Emma appreciated that honesty because it removed the pressure she had feared might exist. During the conversation, she shared her own thoughts about relationships evolving over time, explaining that people sometimes grow through unexpected experiences, but those experiences must always respect trust and emotional safety. The discussion lasted nearly 2 hours, moving slowly from uncertainty to thoughtful reflection as each person explained their feelings with patience. By the time they finished their coffee, the tension that had existed at the beginning of the meeting had softened into a calm understanding. Emma realized that the unusual situation Daniel mentioned earlier was less about changing their marriage and more about exploring whether deeper friendships could exist without harming the foundation they had already built. As they left the cafe, the evening sky glowed orange over the river, and Emma felt both relieved and thoughtful because the conversation had shown her that life sometimes presented complicated questions that required careful consideration rather than quick judgment. Daniel walked beside her quietly for a few minutes before asking how she felt about everything now that she had heard Michael speak directly. Emma looked at the calm water moving under the bridge and admitted that she still needed time to process the idea fully, but she was grateful that everyone involved respected honesty above everything else. The unusual situation was still unfolding, and although no decisions had been made yet, Emma sensed that the next step would require courage, trust, and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered in their lives together. Over the next several days, Emma tried to return to her normal routine, but the conversation at the cafe stayed quietly in her thoughts as she worked at the library, arranged books on the shelves, and helped visitors find what they needed, yet her mind often drifted back to the unusual situation that had entered her life so unexpectedly. She realized that nothing about the discussion had been dishonest or harmful, but it had opened a door to questions about relationships, trust, and companionship that she had never needed to think about before. One afternoon, while closing the library early because of a small community event, Emma found herself sitting by the large window overlooking the quiet street, reflecting on the years she had spent building her life with Daniel, and how their marriage had always been based on communication and respect rather than strict expectations. That night, when Daniel returned home, they sat together at the dining table and talked again, this time with calmer minds because the surprise of the original idea had already passed. Daniel admitted that the situation had made him reflect deeply about how relationships grow and change over time, explaining that he had never wanted Emma to feel pressured into anything, but believed that honesty about feelings was important in any strong partnership. Emma appreciated hearing that because she valued the same openness, and she explained that what mattered most to her was protecting the emotional safety they had created together during their years of marriage. Daniel nodded and said that whatever path they chose would always respect that foundation first. A few days later, Michael invited them both to a small outdoor gathering with several mutual friends, explaining that he did not want their entire connection to revolve around serious conversations, but also normal social moments where people could relax and enjoy each other's company. Emma agreed to attend because she believed spending time together in a natural setting might help everyone understand each other better. The gathering took place in a quiet park beside a river where early autumn leaves were beginning to change color, and as the evening progressed, Emma noticed how comfortable the atmosphere felt, with friends sharing stories, laughing, and enjoying simple food while the sun slowly moved toward the horizon. Michael behaved exactly the way he always had, respectful, thoughtful, and careful not to create awkward situations. Emma appreciated that he treated both her and Daniel with equal kindness, rather than focusing attention in any uncomfortable way. During one quiet moment while Daniel spoke with another friend near the picnic table, Michael and Emma walked a short distance along the river path where the water reflected the warm evening light. Michael spoke gently, explaining that he hoped their earlier conversation had not created stress in their lives, because his intention had always been rooted in respect rather than expectation. Emma answered honestly, telling him that although the idea had surprised her at first, she now understood that he had been searching for connection after a difficult chapter in his life, something many people experience but rarely admit openly. Michael smiled slightly and said that loneliness can teach people many lessons about the value of trust and emotional support. Emma realized that his words carried quiet sincerity rather than hidden motives, and she began to see the situation from a wider perspective. Sometimes unusual ideas appear simply because people are trying to rebuild their lives in thoughtful ways. When Daniel later joined them, the three of them continued talking about life, careers, and friendships, rather than focusing only on the earlier conversation, and Emma noticed that the connection between all of them felt natural, rather than forced. Over the next few weeks, their friendship gradually grew stronger through shared dinners, group outings, and casual conversations that helped each person understand the others more deeply. Emma found herself appreciating Michael's thoughtful perspective on life, while Daniel valued the honest communication that had developed between everyone involved. Yet Emma also remained careful to protect the balance of her marriage, always remembering that trust must remain the center of every decision. One evening, as she and Daniel walked home after meeting Michael for dinner downtown, the city lights reflecting softly across the wet pavement. After a light rain, Daniel asked Emma if she felt the unusual situation had become easier to understand now that time had passed. Emma thought about the question carefully before answering that life sometimes presents people with unexpected possibilities, but the real challenge is not the idea itself, but how people handle it with honesty and emotional responsibility. Daniel agreed, saying that the strength of their relationship came from their willingness to talk openly, even about uncomfortable topics. Emma looked up at the quiet night sky and realized that the unusual situation that once felt confusing had slowly transformed into something different. Not a problem or temptation, but a reminder that relationships are strongest when people trust each other enough to discuss even the most unexpected thoughts. However, she also sensed that the story was not completely finished yet, because emotional journeys rarely end with a single conversation. The friendships they were building were still evolving, and Emma knew that the future would eventually reveal whether this unusual chapter would remain simply a meaningful experience or grow into something that changed their lives in ways none of them had fully predicted. Weeks slowly passed after that evening by the river, and life began to settle into a new rhythm for Emma, Daniel, and Michael. Yet the unusual situation that had once felt confusing had gradually transformed into something calmer and more meaningful. Emma continued working at the library, while Daniel focused on his architecture projects, and Michael often joined them for casual dinners or weekend walks, not as someone creating tension, but as a trusted friend who respected the boundaries they had carefully built together. What surprised Emma the most was how natural everything began to feel once honesty remained at the center of their connection. Because there were no secrets, no hidden messages, and no uncomfortable expectations, only open conversations that allowed everyone to express their thoughts without fear. One evening near the end of autumn, the three of them met again at a small restaurant downtown where warm lights glowed against the cold evening air outside, and during that dinner, Emma noticed how much their understanding of each other had grown since the first surprising conversation that rainy night. Daniel spoke about a new building project he was designing, while Michael shared news about rebuilding his career after the difficult divorce, and Emma listened to both men with a quiet smile because she realized something important had changed inside her as well. The unusual situation had forced her to think deeply about what love, trust, and companionship truly meant in real life, rather than in simple definitions. After dinner, they walked together along the quiet streets where early winter air carried the smell of nearby cafes and city lights reflected on the sidewalks. And during that walk, Michael paused for a moment before speaking with calm honesty. He said that over the past few weeks, he had come to understand something important about himself. That what he had been searching for after his divorce was not complicated relationships or emotional risks, but simply the feeling of belonging again, the warmth of being around people who respected him and cared about his well-being. He looked at Emma and Daniel with gratitude and explained that their kindness had already given him that sense of connection. Emma listened carefully and felt a quiet sense of relief because she understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes people believe unusual situations will change everything dramatically, but often the real change happens inside a person's heart, where understanding replaces confusion. Daniel placed a hand on Michael's shoulder and told him that friendship alone can be powerful enough to help someone rebuild after difficult experiences, and Michael nodded in agreement. Emma then spoke gently, explaining that when the unusual idea first appeared, she had worried it might challenge the balance of her marriage, but instead it had strengthened the trust she shared with Daniel because they had faced the situation together with honesty rather than fear. Hearing those words made Daniel smile because he knew their relationship had grown stronger through the process of discussing difficult topics openly. As they continued walking, Emma noticed how peaceful the moment felt compared to the uncertainty of that first night when Daniel came home with something unusual on his mind. The three of them stopped near a small bridge overlooking the river, where city lights shimmered on the dark water, and Michael said quietly that sometimes life brings people together in unexpected ways, not to complicate their lives, but to teach them something valuable about connection and empathy. Emma realized he was right, because the experience had helped her understand that relationships are not only about romance or traditional roles, but also about trust, support, and emotional maturity. When they finally said goodbye that night, the cold air carried a calm silence that felt comforting rather than uncertain, and Emma walked home beside Daniel feeling grateful for the honesty that had guided them through the unusual chapter of their lives. Once inside the house, she stood by the same kitchen window where the story had quietly begun weeks earlier, looking out at the quiet street while reflecting on everything that had happened. The rain that once filled her with questions was gone now, replaced by a clear winter sky and a peaceful sense of clarity. Daniel joined her and wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders before asking what she was thinking. Emma smiled softly and answered that sometimes life presents situations that seem complicated at first, but later reveal simple truths about people and relationships. Daniel nodded because he understood that the unusual moment they had faced together had not broken anything in their lives, but instead reminded them how important honesty and trust truly are. From that point forward, Michael remained a close and valued friend who shared their dinners, holidays, and celebrations, while Emma and Daniel continued building their life together with stronger communication and deeper appreciation for the bond they had created over the years. The unusual situation that once seemed capable of changing everything had indeed changed their lives, but not in the dramatic way Emma first feared. Instead, it strengthened their understanding of friendship, loyalty, and emotional maturity, proving that when people face unexpected moments with honesty and respect, they can transform uncertainty into growth. And as Emma looked out the window that quiet night, she realized the most powerful part of the story was not the unusual idea itself, but the way three people chose trust and kindness to guide them toward a future built on understanding rather than fear.